Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Rabbit Rampage, and with me today to go on a bit of a rampage over this short is my good friend Eli Copperman. Say hi.
Oh, you, huh? Well, if you're the one making this commentary, then I'm out of here.
Well, that's one short review right there.
No. All jokes aside, thanks for having me back, Anthony. So today it looks like we're reviewing, I think the best way to describe it is the poor man's Duck Amuck. And it's ironic we're calling it that considering it's from the same creator as Duck Amuck, Chuck Jones, and also Michael Maltese. But we'll go into the trivia a little later.
So a few bits of info just to get underway. So as mentioned, this is a review for Rabbit Rampage, released on the 11th of June 1955. It's the 742nd in the series, and it's directed by, well, we've already mentioned it, Chuck Jones, of course. Now, this on physical media has been released in two ways. So originally it was released on the Looney Tunes Golden Collection Volume 6 DVD set, but it wasn't restored there, although it has an interesting extra, which is the music-only track, so it's still worthwhile having that. But it's been remastered and released on the Looney Tunes Collector's Choice Volume 2 Blu-ray set, and yes, they fixed up the horrible opening Photoshop titles that they had on the streaming service for that release, so it's looking really good. It is under copyright, can't show you the full thing here on YouTube unless Warner Brothers themselves choose to upload it on their own channel. They may do so. It's a safe cartoon, but I'd rather they show Duck Amuck instead. In case you haven't seen this one, well, yeah, it's basically a remake of sorts to Duck Amuck, where instead of Daffy being tormented by Bugs, we have Bugs being tormented by Elmer. And apologies if I spoiled the ending there, but we were going to do so regardless of this review, so there you are. So, a few bits of trivia for this one. So, it's one of only 3 times where Elmer wins. So, you've got this, you've got Hairbrush, which already came out, so it's funny that 2 of them came out in 55. And then at the end of What's Opera Doc, where, you know, what did you expect in an opera? And happy ending. The interesting thing about this one is that this is one of the first few shorts to come out from what's called the post-shutdown period. So the studio briefly shut down to retool for 3D. That never took off. Studio got reopened. And while Jones was reassembling his unit, they did this short. And you'll notice in the credits, there's only one animator, and that's Ben Washam. And he really did the whole thing himself. So the reason I think they chose to make this kind of a short to get things going is A, so they can have something in the pipeline, and B, it's something easy for one animator to do, because 98% of this short is just one character, Bugs, and the other 2% is that little bit of Elmer at the end, and yes, I guess those Bugs clones that you see later on, but all in all, it's a one-man show. And it also makes it interesting, if you are interested in learning to identify animators, this could be seen as like a Rosetta Stone of sorts, where if you want to know how Ben Washam animates, you can use this short as a reference and then go back to the other shorts and go, okay, that looks like Benny Washam. No, that's not Benny Washam, that's Ken Harris or whatever, right? So it's interesting in that regard as well.
Yeah, Chuck Jones's animators are a little harder to identify than some other animators, but Ben Washam definitely stinks out in the sense that a lot of his animation is very, I don't want to say like fluid, but very appealing to look at. And there's also a sense of angular design any time he'll draw characters like Bugs or Daffy or Porky. And what's interesting is I don't know how many specific cartoons that Chuck Jones had him do this, but in nearly every bunny cartoon at the very end, he would give the last shot to Ben Washam. A very good example at the end of Operation Rabbit, after Wile has basically given up and says, "My name is Mud," and then Bugs goes, "And just remember, mud spelled backwards is dumb." That was animated by Ben Washam, at least according to Tom Cito, who talked a lot about Ben Washam every now and then. But Ben was a very fascinating animator. He was pretty much with Chuck Jones from the very start, like as far back as The Night Watchman. I don't know what he was doing at the Warner Brothers studio beforehand. I don't know if he was like an in-betweener or an assistant, but seeing him really find his own style as an animator at this point does at least work out. The overall cartoon doesn't entirely work, and we'll go more into that later, but really, if anything, this cartoon is worth watching just to see Ben Washam take over a whole cartoon on his own, at least as far as animation goes.
Exactly. Despite the fact that this is rather, I guess, controversial, some might argue. This is not a short work that has no merit whatsoever. It definitely has a lot. It's going to always be compared to Duck Amuck, whether you like it or not. And I think even Jones knew that. It's always going to be compared, and we can tell you all this right now. Yes, Duck Amuck is the superior short. And I think part of it is over what Bugs Bunny was by this point. So earlier on, when Bugs Bunny was still being formulated as a character with Tex Avery, Clampett, and so on, his personality was a little bit all over the place. So sometimes he'd play really cool, and then other times he'd be a victim, and he'd be angry against characters like Cecil Turtle and that kind of thing. But towards the end of the 40s, his character was somewhat solidified. There'd be slight differences between the units. He was basically a calm, cool, collected character by the end of it. So then you see this, Sean, and you think, why is he a victim? Why is he getting so easily angered? Couldn't he just twist this whole situation and get back at this animator towards the end or something?
Yeah, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Bugs eventually losing in a cartoon. Like, as you mentioned, Bob Clampett did that pretty well with Bugs, but that was before Bugs' personality was fully solidified. I would say at this point, given that Bugs' personality was fully realized, Chuck Jones himself, it felt like he wanted to experiment with Bugs, but he didn't really do it in a way that made a lot of sense, because in this cartoon, Bugs just flat out, it's like the second he gets introduced and he sees who the cartoonist is, he just immediately does not want anything to do with the picture. And that just seems kind of off about Bugs Bunny. Like, Bugs himself, Bugs just starts off grumpy in this cartoon, and it just doesn't really fit. Now, if it started off with him as his usual cool self, because Bugs Bunny, let's be honest here, is the king of cool by this point in time anyway, it would make a lot more sense if things started off naturally, but then out of nowhere, the cartoonist started messing with him in the same way as Duck Amuck. But unlike Daffy, who was pissed off with the cartoonist from the get-go, what if Bugs eventually, he still maintained his normal, cool, chillax attitude, but then eventually he slowly just lost his cool and went off on the cartoonist? That, I think, would work a lot better. And I feel like that would actually give Bugs a lot more reason to not want to do the cartoon anymore. But with Bugs being grumpy, I feel like that should have been introduced maybe midway through the cartoon, not at the very beginning.
And I think the reason Duck Amuck works is that Daffy was like always a hysterical type character, getting easily frustrated and just prone to anger. And yeah, Bugs is the master of cool, and yeah, this just feels out of character, at least by this point. And I think that when we see more obstacles thrown at Daffy, it's funny because we love seeing that guy getting angrier and angrier. Whereas here, it just feels kind of, I don't know, just sad. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but still, there's still a lot of merits to it. And I reckon we can take a look at this short from start to finish and go through exactly what they are. What do you say?
So let's start all the way from the screenplay.
That's right. And I do love the title card idea where it's a literal script and the page is flipped over. We can see the people are involved. And then we see the first page, which is just about the start of every Bugs Bunny short, which is like Bugs comes out of a hole and says, "What's up, Doc?" And I like the fact that Jones has pared it down to its bare essentials. The script. Not even a storyboard, just a script. A lot of these shorts, there weren't even proper scripts for them. They were just storyboarded out. And so it's interesting seeing an actual movie script as opposed to a storyboard instead. But still, it's a nice touch. It definitely is. But I like the fact that this animator, who's so good, he's not just a great penciler, but apparently he's got a magic paintbrush that can paint this whole background, which I get it, it's to move the story forward, I get it, but it's still pretty funny. But look at the detail here. Look at the paintbrush tip. It actually changes color itself as necessary too. It's not just one color. It's these little touches that plus it, so to speak. But he paints the background, and when I say he, we're talking about Elmer, the unseen animator, which we don't know until the very end. He paints everything and decides, nah, I'm going to raise this hole and put it up in the sky. Which is funny. Bugs gets up, he falls down, great animation once again, and he says, "What's up, Doc?"
Meep. What's up, Doc?
That's a nice little start, but Then we see angry Bugs. Oh, it's you. You have to wonder, though, how did Elmer go from being an inept hunter to an animator anyway?
Maybe he's inept as a hunter, but actually pretty skilled as an artist. Who knows?
You have to wonder what the interview process would have been like with Mr. Ward.
Oh, you, huh? Well, if you're the one who's gonna draw this picture, then count me out. Capital O, capital U, capital P. Out. So goodbye to you and farewell to thee.
Of course, we start off pretty simple. Bugs is like, nah, I want nothing to do with this. Goes to dive back into the hole, but of course the hole gets a raise. Again, wonderful animation by Ben Washam there. So he stands up and says, look, Buster, what's the big idea? I said I wasn't working with you, and that is that. And the animator paints a yellow stripe. And for those who don't know, because this is one of those things where you feel like a lot of people know, but they really don't. If you put a yellow stripe on the back, it's like you're yellow, you're scared, you're scared to work with this animator. But, that meaning might be lost on some people today.
If you remember the Foghorn Leghorn, that one bit after Henry's dad gets beaten up by Foghorn, and Henry's like, was that a chicken pop? His dad says, you think I'll let a chicken do that to me? That's just a loudmouth schnook. And you see him as he turns around and leaves, his back flashes yellow.
For some, it might be just lost on them today, but that's okay. That's what we're here for, to explain some of this stuff. So Bugs grabs the brush, breaks it in half, and as we see in the last shot of the short, we can see that there's plenty more brushes where that came from. But he draws a picket sign saying, I won't work, and then another picket sign later on saying, I refuse to live up to my contract, and Bugs gets all freaked out and says, okay, I'm going to now work on this picture, and he then pauses once the animator draws the hat on the head. And he's like, yeah, I'm not supposed to wear a hat. Now, I love the touches here with all these hats. First of all, wonderful animation again, with all the different hats being thrown and drawn, and so on. But I like the music in this one. Milt Franklin does the score, and he doesn't use too many of the funny musical puns, but he does it here, but it's very blunt. So, for example, when he wears that woman's hat, you very briefly hear Ain't She Sweet?
You know I'm not supposed to wear a hat. Cut it out! You crazy idiot!
And you also hear a few other musical puns there, but they're so blunt and quick.
I'm not a big fan of this scene. Never mind that, like, Bugs is saying he's not supposed to wear a hat. What are you talking about, Bugs? You've worn hats in a lot of your pictures. But even beyond that, I like the designs of the hats, and I do like the musical puns, but I think the scene kind of drags on a little too much for my own personal taste, and I'm glad he got the idea to just say, okay, I'm done. I would feel the same way after a while.
There's even a diving helmet at one stage, and it's just all these different hats. And it's like, that settles it. Get yourself another boy. I'm through. What a Leonardo da Vinci, which is a reference to Leonardo da Vinci, the famous painter. The next bit's pretty interesting. And I just also want to point out at this point, even though this shares a lot with Duck Amuck in terms of concept, I like the fact that a lot of these gags are fresh. Some might say maybe some of these gags were like leftovers from Duck Amuck that they didn't use or something, but I don't feel there's much repetition here.
I'll give the short this, that the gags are pretty fresh and unique within this short. That is like one thing I'll give it compared to Duck Amuck, and at least it didn't recycle any of the gags, or at least even if it did, it didn't recycle them verbatim. Although the shots coming up are kind of interesting because Duck Amuck was executed like it was one continuous shot up until the very end when you cut to Bugs at the drawing table. But in this bit where Bugs is like upside down and he tries hiding in his hole and then he falls down with the anvil, there's actually roughly, I want to say 3 to 4 cuts of him at the tree. And I thought that was a little weird, but the more I did think about it, I thought if there is one place to cut away to a slightly different composition compared to the other, I think this is the right one to do it in. It suspends the belief and it allows this scene to play out on its own via pantomime action and absolutely no dialogue.
I just like the fact that we see this upside down forest, which is a lovely little look that you can see. And again, by this point, Maurice Noble had not come back to the studio. It's actually Ernest Nordley, so it kind of looks like Maurice Noble in terms of style, but it's obviously not him. It's similar, but I think Nordley does a pretty good job here, all things considering.
Ernie Nordley, like, I don't really know a lot about him beyond the fact that he stepped in to do the layouts for Chuck Jones's work until he got Maurice Noble back, but he does a pretty good job, all things considered. His work seems kind of seamless as far as what Chuck Jones wanted. That's probably why he did hire him, all things considered.
But I like again, this is another great example of Ben Washam's animation where Bugs tries to get into the hole, which everything's upside down, as you can imagine, and there's that quick bit of animation of an anvil being drawn on the tail, causing Bugs to fall down. But the weight of that shot, it just shows a master at work there. It's great. It's one for animators that they should, I think, study anyway.
It's a very well executed shot in its own right, although I guess at the same time, it may go on for a bit too long for other people's enjoyment, but your mileage may vary at the end of the day.
And then Bugs is really pissed off, and he's like, you gold dang con-son, blankety blankety blank, what are you trying to do?
That specific bit could have still been in the cartoon if, as we mentioned before, had this cartoon been Bugs starting off chill and eventually him breaking down. I think they could have just used this whole bit and this bit of Mel Blanc just making up fake swears and slurs and all that.
You golden blank, staggered black, scouring and blinking black punk, are you trying to do? Of all that low dirty...
That would have worked so much better. And again, this is a funny little piece of animation, but for Bugs Bunny, it just doesn't quite work on the whole, if that makes sense.
We're just not used to seeing 1950s Bugs Bunny doing this, but Elmer ends up erasing Bugs's head. And this is a great piece of character animation because you don't even see his head, and yet we know how Bugs is feeling just through the whole tapping of the foot and those subtle cues. So again, it's still done pretty well there. We see the animator draw a pumpkin head on Bugs's body. I love the look of that. And we even briefly hear Turkey in the Straw, because why not?
Why not?
Why not?
That pumpkin face does look really cute.
I'm surprised they haven't merchandised that. There's a merchandise opportunity right there for like Halloween or something. So there you go. Warners, if you're watching, definitely consider that. I reckon that would sell. But yeah, in any case, Bugs is not happy about that. He wants it corrected. We see a tiny version of Bugs' head, and that version of tiny head Bugs, no more Chungus. We need tiny head Bugs to be the new meme.
Yes.
You know,
hashtag tiny head Bugs.
That's better. Why didn't you do it in the first place? Gad, what a huge carrot. Hey, what's the matter with my voice?
And so it's like, okay, redraw my head, but normal size. And then the ears, what sort of ears does he put on?
Not exactly rabbit ears, but let's just say the kind of ears that you and I know about.
Yes, and it's like, all right, you comic book Rembrandt, make with the razor.
Ears. Not human ears, my friend. Rabbit ears, long ones.
I like how Elmer's so literal, where it's like, okay, you gotta make rabbit ears, long ones. So what does he do? Draws it long. The only criticism of that long ears is that I think he should have done was actually start drawing the ears as though it's normal for a split second and then make it long, rather than start it off as long and drawing it in, as you see in the shot there. Very minor criticism, very minor. I would have done it that way, but whatever. It's not that big a deal.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and don't be so danged literal.
Literal.
And speaking of literal, Bugs walks away, Elmer raises the tail, and it's like, okay, you vandal, put that tail back. We get a horse's tail.
Is a horse's tail, my friend. It belongs on a horse.
So the animator, being literal again, draws him as a horse. I love the design of this horse, by the way. I love the Ben Washam horse is what we'll call it. It's so nice. And especially the horse having that attitude and eating the carrot, which, funnily enough, horses are more inclined to eat carrots than rabbits do.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people, certainly not the people at Termite Terrace, really knew that rabbits don't really eat carrots, at least not compared to other animals.
But of course, the contract clearly states that he's to be drawn as a rabbit, and if you don't want to get into trouble, well, the animator draws him as a rabbit, all right.
My contract clearly states that I am always to be drawn as a rabbit. So if you don't want to get yourself in a peck of trouble, just...
And again, this is another interesting little shot there. I just love this design here. It's always funny seeing an experienced artist like Ben Washam or someone similar having to draw quote unquote badly. I'll always love that.
Oh, it's so funny. Well, when they'd animate or draw characters who were supposed to be poorly drawn, so to say.
It's interesting you have to sort of regress and just draw badly, but I love the design though, this abstract version, and you can't even call it a UPA style bugs either because
no, it's its own thing.
It's just its own thing, I guess. But I like this touch here. So, okay, the animator draws him back to normal, and I like the sarcasm here, Bugs saying, "So I'm me again. What a novel idea. You want to make me into a grasshopper or something?" But as he says grasshopper, I love that brief moment of Bugs bouncing around and his eyes being open, the pupils.
So I'm me again, eh? What a novel idea. Sure you wouldn't want to make me into a grasshopper or something? No, I take it back.
I don't even know if that was Chuck's idea in his character layouts or if that was Ben Washam wanting to just add a little touch to it. But I will say that one moment alone does make the cartoon slightly watchable for me.
It looks like the animator is about to do this, but he's like, no, I take it back. I take it back. So now we see one of two things that they do repeat from Duck Amuck, although they do a little bit differently. So this bit here, we see not one duplicate, like one Daffy Duck duplicate in Duck Amuck. Here we see two duplicates of Bugs, and they both say, "What's up, Duck?" in unison.
What's up, Doc? Oh, no you don't. Out, you imposter! That really does it. I suggest that you go get the big boss, and we'll see about this.
Not really much to this one. Bugs just gets upset and pushes him out of the frame, so there's not really much to it.
Yeah, I think they could have pushed the gag a little more. I'm not saying have it be exactly like a full-on confrontation like in Duck Amuck, but maybe have something where those two outsmart Bugs like his normal old-school trickster self, and then Bugs gets sped up with that, you know?
Also, if you look at the background, that's why I love this restoration, it looks like a piece of paper that's not quite new. It's like slightly crinkled.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a nice little touch, which you can see in these restorations. But, of course, it's the last straw. Buck says, no, I'm not going to leave this spot. And the animator can't stop him. But what does the animator draw? A whole railroad bit. Because why not?
Of all things, like he couldn't even draw Bugs being on top of a bunch of TNT. Instead, it's just a full-on locomotive. Why not? If it can happen to Wile E. Coyote, it can definitely happen to Bugs.
And then we get a little twist on, again, with Duck Amuck, where in Duck Amuck you have the whole the end thing, but that's something that Bugs, as the animator, pushes on Daffy much to his frustration. Here, Bugs actually wants it to end, so he's just like, you know what, I'm just going to end this. And we end up seeing who the animator is. You know, spoiler alert, you guys already know this by now, it is Elmer Fudd. I think that shot of the animator table is the same photo as in Duck Amuck. It looks the same, because that's actually a photo.
You know what? I think it is the exact same photo. You're right. Like, they didn't even bother reshooting the photograph or anything. But then again, as you said, if they really did want to get this cartoon out there, that single last shot is definitely proof of that.
But we end right there, and at least the punchline is pretty good.
I feel like we got what we said off the bat. If I was a little critical, but also sharing some positive stuff, it's that I think this cartoon is kind of not a mixed bag necessarily, but I think it does have just enough enjoyable stuff for me to like kind of sort of like it. It's just, I do wish this cartoon was a lot better and had it been like thought out a little more, because the way it's executed just doesn't work for Bugs at this point in time. But I feel like had they put a little more time and thought into it, it could have been a lot better at the same time. And honestly, I would actually recommend this to people, maybe not so much to enjoy, but more just to see what happens when a similar premise of an otherwise great cartoon is like redone again, but maybe a little differently. And so people can compare and contrast which one works and which one might not work, so to say.
Yeah, so look, this one is interesting, I think, more as a curio, and unfortunately it doesn't quite work purely because you're putting Bugs in a role that by this point it's completely out of character. But there's a lot of good things about it. As I said, it's a showcase of Ben Washam's animation. You got some wonderful gags in here. I like some of the music. But yeah, it just feels kind of weird. It's always going to be compared to Duck Amuck, which is the superior short. This one gets, I think, 7 out of 10. I can't be too harsh on it because I see this short being made more out of necessity to get something out the door. And this was probably the quickest thing they could come up with, to have one animator do all this animation while Chuck rebuilds his units.
I would give it maybe a 6 or a 7, like 7 at the absolute most, but I think it's more of a 6, maybe even at absolute worst a 5. But just to be on the safe side, I'll give it like maybe a 6 out of 10, 6.5 or something. It's not that bad. It's not that great. There's definitely worse cartoons out there.
Yeah, so that will do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
Well, anyway, we finally got rid of that Wesky Wabbit.
And you can't stop me.
Well, anyway, I finally got even with that schooly wabbit.